most of you here probably know. She contacted me and said, "Hey Susan, can you man my campaign table?" And I said, "Hold on, what is this again?" And she says, "It's Scott Pressler." "Oh, okay, oh sure." I had to look him up to find out who he was. And for those of you that don't know, Scott Pressler is known on Twitter as the Persistence. He's great at rallying people to get registered to vote. He wore a backpack with Trump on the back. He was a great follower of his to get people to vote for him. And he was in Cheyenne because he was getting people fired up to vote out Liz Cheney. So at the end of the meeting, Marissa and I went up and asked him if we could have our pictures taken with him. He was happy to do that, and in the course of getting our picture taken, he asked me, he said, "Well, what are you gonna run for?" I said, "Oh no, I'm just here to support Marissa." Once again, he said, "Oh, okay. So you're not running for anything now, but what are you going to run for?" Without even thinking, I could hear the words come out of my mouth. I said, "Well, maybe I'll run for school board." So I will tell you that I'm married. I'm a mother of 2 and a stepmom of 3. Together we have 12 grandchildren. And at the end of that meeting, as I'm getting into my car, I can honestly tell you that I knew 2 things about the school board. 1, every district had one, and 2, I got to vote for who those persons were going to be, and that was it. So moving forward, it's now August, and I have a friend at work whose husband's a teacher, and she said, "Oh, well, don't you know you can Zoom the meetings?" And she showed me how, and this was great. So now I'm watching the school board meetings, and I'm interested, again, because I have 10 grandchildren who are in school, and I'm hoping that we're not gonna have a mask policy, and I'm listening, and there's no vote. So one of the board members says, "Excuse me, Madam Chair, Superintendent Crespo, aren't we going to vote on this?" And Superintendent Crespo said, "No, there won't be a vote because my internal team had already made the decision, and we're going to start school in the masks." So that night and the next day, I prayed about that, about what to do. And again, in talking to my friend at work, she said, "Well, you can email the board members." So I said, "That's great, I'm gonna do that." How do I do that? So I called the district office and I talked to very nice, just a very warm person, Darlene, who actually walked me through the steps to find out what all their email addresses were. And I did just that. I emailed every board member, and I continued to pray. It was just a few days later that my daughter got an email saying that although it's highly recommended, your student can start with or without a mask. Praise the Lord on that. However, the euphoria didn't last very long. September the 8th, they had an emergency meeting, a 3-hour meeting, and the masks were put back on. So despite all of my emails, that was how it was going to be. So I knew that you could speak at the meetings, but it wasn't until a friend of mine, Katie, spoke. She spoke about the mask policy, and hearing her, boy, was I so impressed with how she had handled herself. I decided that I would go on Facebook and I would message her and tell her that. So when I got to her Facebook page, I saw this little banner around her profile picture that said Moms for Liberty. Moms for Liberty. Never heard of them. I wonder who they are. So of course I looked them up. After that, I knew that these were my kind of people. They were like-minded and courageous. They were unapologetic about standing up for their parental rights to make decisions for their children. I started attending their local meetings and speaking up at school board meetings. I've been attending board meetings and speaking up now since October, so about 10 months. I've spoken on subjects like the mask mandate, stakeholders being called domestic terrorists. The evening of the hate crime resolution, I spoke about transparency and cherry picking who got advance notification to speak on specific topics. I've spoken about changes in the that the Biden administration made to Title IX, so that schools who wanted to keep the lunch money for those that had free or reduced lunches, we would have to let transgender students, AKA biological boys, into the bathrooms, the girls' bathrooms, their locker rooms, their showers, and share a room on overnight stays. The last board meeting that I attended, I spoke about the sexually explicit and graphic books in our schools. The books that talk about casual sex, rape, incest, pedophilia, group sex, tutorials, and how I thought it should be an opt-in program. Because not every parent is paying attention. And I'm going to tell you that when my two children were in high school, I was one of those parents. I was busy. I wasn't paying attention. My son was in the IB program, an ROTC. He had already signed on to serve at the Army Guard, and so he was doing drill weekend once every month. He was in Civil Air Patrol. He played tennis. My daughter played softball for Cheyenne Extreme. She was involved in National Honor Society and in her youth group. I trusted the schools. I wasn't paying attention. So in late April to mid-May, we started talking about getting serious about choosing conservative candidates to run for school board. We tossed the idea around for a month or so, and at this point I said, well, if you can't find anyone else to run for the South Triad, then I would be interested. I met with my pastor at Cheyenne Hills and some of the ladies for Moms for Liberty. We talked about that. I went home and I prayed about it. I talked to my husband at length. We spent a long time talking about what that might look like, how that might affect our downtime, our private lives. It was decided that I would keep praying, but that I would also contact my Bible study leader, Brian Kopsa, who had once been a trustee on the school board. So we set up a meeting, we had coffee, and we talked about it. He told me how he had 3 daughters, and at that time, they would write notes and leave them in his home office because either he was working his day job or he was busy attending to needs for the school board. When I talked about a vacation, he laughed. So I kept praying. We had another meeting with another group of conservative people. And at the time, I didn't think it went very well, but I decided I would go home and pray. I told a couple people, I don't want to be a vote splitter. But when I woke up the next morning after praying, the first words in my head were, I told you to run. I did not say it would be easy. I am not a politician. I'm not a retired teacher. I have no ties to the NEA or WBA. I spent 20 years as a military wife. I'm a grandmother, stakeholder, community member. I am opposed and disgusted with the sexually graphic and explicit books in our secondary schools. I'm concerned about the budget. Our 2021-2022 budget was $352,458,312. We're expected to have right around that same amount for the next fiscal year. I can tell you that 82 cents of every dollar went to salaries and benefits. Only 16.3 cents of that dollar went into the classrooms. We had added ESSER funds, which translation, that's COVID monies, and we blew right through it. In my opinion, Wi-Fi on every school bus or a 24/7 tutoring program that's online for students was a waste of money. I think it could have been better served with things like elementary school sports or monies much needed to be set aside for the construction of a 5th and 6th grade school in the South Triad, one like Meadowlark Elementary School or the new Coyote Ridge. Perhaps even a new boiler for Fairview Elementary School. Since I've mentioned the construction of the schools in the South Triad, let me take a moment and fill you in on a community engagement meeting that I was privileged to attend on July the 6th. It was hosted by Assistant Superintendent Jim Fraley and another man, Andy Knapp. It was open to all South Triad community members, but including myself and my +1, we had 12 people. One dad, that's it. So the reason that they had the meeting at Meadowlark Elementary School is so that they could show us what they wanted to do on the 50 acres by Atherbach Elementary School, how they wanted to build a 5th and 6th grade school there. The district understands that the schools are overcrowded and that there is a need for this. That would be phase 1 at about $30 million. Phase 2 would be the tear down and then rebuild of Cole Elementary School. They have the land that it sits on, plus if you're familiar with that community building that they do the gymnastics in, that's also owned by the school district, and at that time they would take that also. Phase 3 would be the tear down and rebuild of our elementary school. And I don't know who here, if anyone knows anyone that goes to our elementary school, so then you're well aware of the leak that was in there and how they had to go in and fix the roof. So there's a state list of buildings in need, and this is the catch-22. If you fix your building because you can no longer insure it unless you do, chances are your building will go down the list and other schools will rise above it to get that money. But what we're looking for is $100 million to do the 3 phases. I have a group of people that are willing to email our state House reps and senators and then meet and work up a brief to send to the education board. Prayers appreciated. I want to briefly speak about social emotional learning, SEL. I believe it's an umbrella for subjects like critical race theory, comprehensive sex education, gender identity, equity, intersectionality, which if you don't know what that means, racism, sexism, classism. That's a class that I would personally like to see gone, but it's tied to the ESSER funds, so we can't do that. So my proposal would be to make sure that parents know what's going on and allow them the opportunity to opt out. My hill to die on is the transgender movement. Let me be clear, God does not make mistakes. I agree that there's a very small percentage that do have gender dysphoria. The majority of students today are sucked in through school indoctrination, social conformity, as in wanting to be like their friends or what they've seen on YouTube, and the need for attention. And sadly, most counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists today affirm this behavior instead of being honest and calling it what it is. So you wouldn't say to a young girl out there who's suffering from anorexia that comes into your office and says, I need to lose 10 pounds. You wouldn't say to her, yes, you do, and here's how you can do it. Get an apple, slice it into 8 pieces, and every time you feel hungry throughout the day, take an apple slice and eat it. And then you can honestly tell your parents, oh yes, I've eaten. It's not the way. Last, I'd like to close by letting you know that I'm a huge supporter of teachers. I still think most are in it for good reasons, and that they don't want to indoctrinate the children. I know of 4 teachers personally in this last year that have quit. Some of their reasons run from too much to teach in too little time, unattainable goals or standards, not wanting to teach the leftist agenda. And last, and I think the saddest, is that they weren't supported by their principals and the administration, and they never heard from their parents. Let me tell you, from my time in volunteering, a small note to your child's teacher to say thank you. I know your job is tough, but I've got your back. Or thank you for dealing with my son, David, or my daughter, Jennifer. Goes a long, long way. I'd like to close with scripture. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the whole armor of God, that you will be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this world's darkness, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So be on the alert and be on guard. Thank you.